Alright, now normally I'd probably usually do one like this when we're doing like the horror ones in October, but screw it, I'll go ahead and do it now. The Killer Kid movies. I know there's many of these, most notably the kind of pioneer of it seems to be widely considered The Bad Seed from like 1966 with Patty McCormick. I think it's 66, it's somewhere in there. But then this kind of happened in the 90s where we actually had, despite the fact that Mikey seems like it would be like the weird little low-budget ripoff of the much more noticeable The Good Son, Mikey was actually the year before, which is a fact I often forget, because it just really seems like it'd be the other way around. And it's worth noting that not only do these have the, similar plots, I guess, but they also have the rare distinction that they're both kind of suffered the same fate as far as the UK goes, where The Good Son actually wasn't released theatrically in the UK because of the James Baldry case that was happening around that time. But they did eventually get like certification, whereas to my understanding, at least as far as I've read, Mikey is still technically banned in the UK because they just never resubmitted it for certification. I guess they just didn't bother to. But this eventually did find its way there. So but it does sound a little more, edgy to say that Mikey's banned in a certain area, but probably not necessarily for the reasons you would think. So, so I think we'll go ahead and start talking about The Good Son from 1993. Which really the very first thing you think of with this movie is why does it exist? Why would they do this? Because you've got the success that Macaulay Culkin found with Home Alone, naturally. And of course they've even put him in a winter setting again, so he pretty much still is wearing Kevin McAllister's attire. So it's like they really pretty much just plucked him into one movie and put him in another. But now he has this murderous, psychopathic personality. So it's like, when I say why, because you think like, well, obviously, you want to throw audiences off, and it's like, oh, you knew him for this thing, well, how about this thing? Just to basically fuck with audiences, I guess. But the thing was apparently, this is all his dad's fault. Obviously, in regards to negotiating with putting him in movies, his dad had, like, kind of that nightmarish reputation. And it's to my understanding that for some reason he wanted him in this movie so badly that he told Fox that if they didn't cast him in this, that he was going to pull him out of Home Alone 2. And Fox is like, all right, take it. Just whatever you do not deny us Home Alone 2. So, yeah. Now the question is often raised about this movie is, like, who is the audience? Because obviously you've got, kids who know him for Home Alone, and he's a fellow kid, so it's this whole thing. But this isn't really made for them. And a thing about that, it kind of brings up the criticism of this movie's tone. Because you could say, it's not made for children because, it's an R-rated movie about a psychopath. But there's still, especially if it's campy enough, I mean, there's still going to be, like a young person appeal to certain movies like this. But this is a movie that takes itself so deathly serious. Like, there is a zero amount of camp in this movie whatsoever. They are really, really, really playing this straight. That makes it kind of even more of a bizarre thing. Now, of course, I have to confess to the fact that I've probably seen this movie a billion times, especially as I was growing up, because it was just... And I don't know that I thought that it was, like, a great movie, but it's just so fascinating in so many different ways that it exists and the kind of movie that it is. Because, like I said, I mean, if this wanted to take, a more sort of campy approach, much like Mikey does, not necessarily compliment Mikey for its style or anything, but just to imagine this movie being more like Mikey was in the camp department. Whereas The Good Son is like this really serious thriller. Mikey is like a campy slasher movie that just happens to have a kid in the killer role. And this is like a lot different than that. He's like got these really sadistic mind games that he plays, and there's really only a death factor, like, directly, like, they sort of dance around it and they keep hinting at it, but it's never something we really see up close from his character in this. But this kind of comes from, like, the very beginning, when we're introduced to Elijah Wood's character first, obviously. And it's just him on the soccer field, doing his thing, being a kid, and then his dad, David Morse, shows up to take him to the hospital where his mother is about to die of cancer. And when you watch this opening scene, it's like... Another way the tone is off is that we know this is like the heartfelt portion. This is the portion of the movie that's going to make Mark a sympathetic character, so that we already care about him by the time he's being terrorized by Henry. But the weird thing about this is that when David Morse shows up on the soccer field, and it's this moment, we as an audience, if we're seeing it for the first time, don't know where he's about to take him, or even how they're related. And they play, like, thriller music. And it's like, this is a devastating moment where a kid looks at his dad and realizes, this is it. These are probably the last moments of my mother's life, and I'm about to go there and spend them with her. But you watch this opening scene not knowing the context. It looks like David Morse is some sort of predator that's stalking soccer fields for children. So that's just bizarre. But then they get to the hospital, and it's still kind of playing up the weird angle. Like, it's playing up what the movie's going to give us, but that's not really what this moment is calling for. Like, I guess I get it if you, like, in trying to maintain a certain tone throughout, they completely fucked their tone up. So, because then you've got this shot of Elijah Wood and David Morse walking through the hospital, and we get, like, his point of view shot from down below of that woman going by on the stretcher, and it sort of gives you this vibe of, like, how scary children find hospitals, and how it's this really sort of alien thing with all this weird sort of death and darkness in it. For, like, a fraction of a second, for that one scene of him walking down the hallway, and then heartfelt drama, just instantly when we realize why he's there. And this... So, obviously, it's all over the place in the first 2 minutes, tone-wise. And then it obviously turns into this movie about grieving, where Mark is a character that's, like, really... I mean, they obviously do the thing where he feels distant from his dad and all that, but then this kid finds himself in a really dark place where he's like in total and complete denial, but not necessarily the denial you'd kind of expect of a child whose mother has died and he just kind of refuses to believe that that's his reality. It's like it's a continuous thing throughout the movie, and it's like it feels like it's really warped his mind in a way that the movie does not... I mean, I would say the movie doesn't go into enough, but I mean, that would probably sidetrack a little too much. So really the question comes back to, you don't necessarily have to make this as extreme as you do, but we'll get more into that about why that gets a little weirder as it goes on with the Wendy Crewson character. But, so yes, he goes out and he has to stay with Macaulay Culkin and his family while David Morse goes off and does a job so that they can get enough money that he doesn't have to go off to work anymore, and they can spend time together in this post-his-mother world. And that's where we meet Henry, the Macaulay Culkin character, who introduces himself by wearing this emotionless styrofoam mask that he's made for himself, that he also made for Mark, that kind of gives him this... It kind of shows off what basically his soul inside must look like, just this blank white canvas that's kind of sinister looking in its blankness and just emotionlessness, but that we never see that again, so it doesn't matter. Just really an introduction to the character, I guess. And immediate, I'm not really sure how much they wanted to build up what it is with Henry here, because if you look at the differences between the two movies, in Mikey, we know right away that he kills people. Like, that's the opening scene of the movie, is Mikey killing his first family. Just right there. No mystery, no, oh, is it or is it not, no ambiguity. He straight up kills them, and we see it in full detail. There is no question. He even makes little killer quips while he does it, and afterwards. But with Henry, we're going to play the... We're going to gradually get there. He'll seem like a regular kid, but then maybe he'll be a little sinister, then he'll be really sinister, then he'll be flat out evil. Only trouble with this transition is that he's clearly got some sort of secret way about him. Because we've got the scene where the first thing he does is scare his sister with a mask, but that could just be his sister overreacting. So just immediately after that, the first time we really get a look at Henry, he's sitting at this dinner table with Mark and David Morrison, Wendy Gruson, and everybody else. And Henry kicks Mark under the table and, like, is all smug about it. But the thing here is like, is that building... What I think it seems like they might be doing is that they think they're covering up the fact that he's actually got a secretly sinister way about him by disguising it as, like, boys roughhousing or whatever. But, I mean, it just already seems so drastically... We've known this character for, like, 30 seconds. 30 seconds. And the kick under the table already feels totally out of character, by the way he sets himself up. Because obviously he sets himself up to be Smiley Macaulay Culkin, you know, that's the whole point of the movie's existence, really. So, and so this whole thing is like, okay, do they want us to immediately feel like he's sinister, or are they trying to gradually get there? Because it seems like they're in a big old damn hurry with stuff like this. Because then shortly after this, there's the scene when they're in the treehouse. And this is when it's a lot more apparent. So you would think. Where they're going up the treehouse, and then Mark almost falls all the way down, and Henry's got a hold of him, and he has that really... To the credit of Culkin's performance, by the way, the sinister stuff really does come off well. Like, there's nothing... In regards to Culkin's performance, there's nothing wrong in that department. It's actually kind of weird how well he plays this, at the age that he was. So he's got that line when he's got... Him holding onto Mark's hand is the only thing keeping from Mark falling to his death. And he has that delivery of, if I let you go, do you think you could fly? To where he actually looks like he might do that. But then he pulls him up, and then they laugh. And they do their little roughhousing thing again. And, like, this is part of the game. But you can see... And I guess the thing is like, how far you take... Like, how far you can accept just how naive Mark is. because all of the signs are here, but the trouble is I can't tell if the signs are supposed to be here for the audience or not. Because it's like, are we supposed to say, like, oh, is he just roughhousing, or is he actually, you know, almost gonna kill Mark in almost every scene? But it's like, it's way in too much of a hurry to get to that point, but at the same time, it's trying to seem like it's slow burn, but, there's missing pieces here. But yeah, I was talking about Culkin's performance here, which he does sell. But there are moments where the movie kind of holds him back. Where, like, when we get to the scene at the well, and he pulls the cigarettes out and he starts smoking. Now, the thing about this is that, number one, once again, it's one of those things that we only see one time and never again. But also, it's that case of... You get the idea... that this movie is more or less seems to exist for the sake of shock value, or for what I mean. Take out, you know, whatever the hell reason his dad desperately wanted him in this movie for. But the thing is like, you see this and you're like, okay, maybe because of Culkin's performance, I can get on board with this, even if it seems like it's hard to figure out why the movie even exists. But then the second he, like, starts smoking, then you're like, that's just the pure shock value. That's somebody wanting to put the image of Macaulay Culkin smoking in a movie around the time Home Alone had, like, really, really blown up. That was nothing more than shock value. That had served no purpose whatsoever, apart to say, oh yeah, Henry's bad, but Henry's going to do much worse things. Actually, having Mark dangle from the treehouse is significantly more saying this kid's got something wrong with him than the fact that he has secret cigarettes. But, okay. Okay, that scene had to be in there, I guess. But the thing here also is that another thing really working with Culkin is the score. Now, of course, I talked about the score is extremely inconsistent, where, like if this were a drama, the score would probably work when it's being dramatic, and when it's being really creepy and eerie, the score especially works. But the trouble is it just endlessly goes back and forth. Sometimes, a lot of the times in the same scene. Like, you want to criticize the score because it's so inconsistent. But I mean, in its individual moments, for the individual moments that it's working for, it's fine. And it's, obviously Elmer Bernstein has done so many things up to this point. This is so far off the map, but still commendable when it's in its moments. Like I said, in the same scenes, the way these scenes jump around, everything just feels so... What the fuck is even happening? What are you trying to accomplish? I don't know. But then you get scenes in McColgan's performance like Mr. Highway, which are really nice, because he doesn't have to do a whole lot to really get you thinking about the character. Like, the moment... when Mr. Highway kind of seems like this experiment he's just come up with, where it's a dummy that he's had in this shed just sort of waiting for this moment. But the thing is in this moment when he throws it off the bridge and they're watching the crash, and we see Mark watching it in, like, terror, because he had no idea this was going to happen, and we're watching Henry watch the crash, he's so calm about it for something that he has seemingly been prepping for a while. Just the expression on his face, the very first thing you wonder is, has he done this before? Like, I get the feeling this is not the first Mr. Highway that's existed. But, so stuff like that really does work, and some of his monologues, and I understand if people are, like, kind of put off by the monologues, where it's, like, coming from him, it can, obviously it can seem silly to have, like, the, psychopathic monologue many different times coming out of Macaulay Culkin's mouth in 1993. But I don't know, there's still something where he just really kind of sells just how sinister it is. Especially after the Mr. Highway scene, when he has the big one that really brings Mark over into the... Oh, this kid is fucked beyond repair. Okay, I didn't realize I was in this until now. But the thing is when he's doing this, and the monologue itself, like, when he roughly explains to us why he is the way that he is, but it's still pretty vague, I actually think that's a pretty cool way to do that, actually, because we do have the scenes later on with the psychiatrist where we kind of somewhat seem like we're kind of trying to delve into Henry's psyche and exactly... like, is he pure evil, or was he made in some way? And the fact that he basically says that one day he just had, like, an epiphany that he could get away with doing stuff like this. So he's like, why not? But they don't go into it enough that they over-explain it. Like, it's just ambiguous enough and kind of plays with the idea of he was born this way. I do think that's interesting, that they don't go into that. They don't try to explore that too much, but they do it just enough to where you can't say they completely ignored the idea. So I thought that was really well handled. And of course, even the Kid Cudi fans, whoever you may be, his song Unfuckwittable starts with that snippet of dialogue from this movie when Henry says, you can fly and nobody can touch you. I always thought that was an interesting choice. So yeah, I do like... there's nothing... I don't say anything, at least that I can think of, bad about Culkin's performance here. It's just a matter of really the movie itself and the writing and what all went into it. Because it is worth noting that they had, like, other cast members, like Jesse Bradford was, like, really close to playing Henry. But it was only on the insistence of Culkin's dad that this be what this movie is, basically creating a whole entirely different thing. Because that's the thing, though, is it's like, on the surface it looks like nothing more than some sort of weird marketing strategy, where, like you look at the fact that the movie's rated R, which is interesting, because there's almost no blood, there's only one use of the word fuck, and there's no, sexual situations or sexual dialogue or anything like that. So you step back and you kind of think, I feel like it's rated R strictly for the marketing. Strictly so you can have not just the concept of the movie itself, but on top of the fact that it's an R-rated movie. Now, maybe it has something to do with, you know, children being impressionable to somebody who was blowing up at the time or something like that. Obviously, the MPA is very mysterious. But at the same, it all feels like this one big machine managed to somehow make this movie strictly for the marketing of saying Macaulay Culkin is a killer in this R-rated movie. Despite the fact that the R rating really isn't that earned. It's so bizarre. This movie's existence is so weird. I don't know. And that's the thing, too, is that there's something else that the movie could be... Because I was talking about earlier just how deathly seriously it takes itself. Because when you look at it that way, instead of going for the campy approach, there are other characters here in the background that kind of start to come forward, mainly Henry's parents. Mainly his mom, Wendy Crewson, and this was after Home Alone. This was the year before Wendy Crewson would do the Santa Claus. So it's like, if it had been after the Santa Claus also, I would have thought they were going all in on this. But yeah, but the thing here is that you have the grieving angle of Mark losing his mother, David Morse losing his wife, and all that. Even though David Morse is only in the movie for like 2 minutes and then leaves forever. But then you have this other side where they're not the only grieving family, interestingly enough. There's the whole thing of they had the baby Richard that drowned in the bathtub, which obviously we learn eventually was not an accident, and who is Rory Culkin in the picture. And his sister in real life also plays him here also. And the thing about this, though, about Henry's family, is that this is when the movie, because I say it takes itself too seriously, it could have taken itself even more seriously than it does. That's kind of the weird thing, too. Because there's some moments where it's like, God, why is it being so serious? But then there's other times where it's like, you know, they probably could have explored this a little more. Like, obviously you have them grieving over Richard, so you have these little moments where somebody that doesn't get too much screen time is Daniel Hukele, who's playing Henry's dad. And there's like one moment in the movie where it's like, they really could have given Wallace more character. Because it's like, there's one moment that seems just kind of throwaway in the rest of the movie, but it's one moment when Mark and Henry are in bed, but they are still talking. And Wallace walks by and he hears them and he's telling them to go to bed, and they kind of just keep talking and they're playing around. And instead of getting mad, Wallace kind of laughs to himself and then just goes to bed. And it's like, this is a dude that has lost a child, and they've got another child in the house. And it's like, this is probably the happiest moment this dude has had, this fraction of a second, hearing them talking in the room. And we see that in his little laugh before he goes to bed. And it's like, and then we never pay attention to Wallace again. At least not till the end, when he's like starting to freak out finally over what Mark's doing. But by then, he's just turned into a thriller dad that refuses to believe the truth, and it goes into that whole cliche. So yeah, so it's like, there's even more stuff they probably could have gone into if they really, really wanted to go into the seriousness of the movie and the whole grieving angle that's kind of weirdly, like, underlying everything. But no, we've got to get to Henry acting sinister as quickly as possible. And we'll give Wendy Crewson all of the grieving the dead child scenes. And so, and also his sister, where it's like, she may be, like, you know, she's obviously played up to be the annoying sister, but there's also, like, her almost too perfect innocence is kind of like this somewhat perfect balance to Henry's, you know, just the way that he is. So there is some, like, so yeah, it's weird what the movie decides to focus on at which particular times. Where it seems like every time they should be focusing on one aspect of the movie, you kind of think it should be the other, and the other way around. And it never quite finds itself. This is probably the most critical I've been of a movie I've seen as many times as I've seen this one, by the way. And it's another thing where the more you see it, the more you realize just how much of an editing problem it has. Where there's a lot of moments where, like, it's like they don't know where the scenes should end. So sometimes the scenes feel like they end too early, and sometimes the scenes just kind of linger a little too much. Like the moment when they're wearing the styrofoam masks and just staring at each other. Feels like it could have cut like 10 seconds earlier. Or the moment when, after they've played hide and seek, and they decide to go to bed and leave Henry in the attic, and he's just like humming to himself and moving the flashlight around. This scene goes on for like a really long time also. But then there's other scenes where it's like, the scene ends and you're like, oh, I kind of thought that was going somewhere, but I guess not. So Yeah, and that whole hide and seek thing also, when you talk about the family and what they're going through, and Wendy Crewson's character in particular, because it's like, obviously they've been devastated by this and they're haunted by it. Henry uses it for one of his mind games when he brings up Mark wanting Richard's room, just knowing that's going to set off this whole family turmoil thing, even though Mark's had nothing like that. And so the mind games he plays go fucking deep, and I actually do like that. But then you get to some of the stuff that's more like, okay, so she even has this whole monologue where she talks about the reason that Richard died is because she stopped watching him for a second. She took his eyes off and she left him alone, and that's the thing that haunts her the most. And this whole hide and seek thing has to happen because all the kids are left alone. It's like, this is a mother that's in this deep grieving, that's just really in this place of, oh God, this one moment where I abandoned my child ruined my life and took my child's life. And there's a whole sequence of the movie devoted to the fact that the parents are like, see ya, for the night. With no babysitter or anything like that. So, it would have been a cliche, absolutely. But I do kind of wonder how Henry would have interacted with a babysitter. I might take that scene over the hide-and-seek scene, because the hide-and-seek scene, like, plays itself up to be this big, suspenseful scene, but there's not really a lot to it. Obviously, you've got the scene where we're in the dark, we got Mark walking around the dark hallways, nobody knows where Henry is, and then, Henry pops up. And then the game's over. I mean, he does the flashlight thing where he says, what do you think this is, a game? But number one, that's one of those scenes that just kind of ends. It's like, what happened then? Did Mark just walk away from him? Or it's like, no, we needed a trailer shot. That's why that scene's in there. So, once again, it's all about the marketing with this movie. That's the whole reason it exists, was for its advertisements and its trailers. It didn't matter what necessarily happened in the movie, just as long as we had the posters and the spots and all that. That's why this movie exists. So, and then, yeah, they do try to do the whole thing, where they go into the mother's, like, you know, emotional scars and all that, where she keeps going out to the cliff to just stare out there and think about Richard. But the trouble with this is, we have the scene in the shed where Henry tries to take the rubber duck back, and she can we see her see the darkness in him. And it's kind of the point where we're like, oh, now she's realizing that Mark may not be exaggerating at this point. So, this should be probably where the climax begins. When Henry takes the duck and he runs off, and she's like, oh shit, he might actually be insane. But then she just goes kind of back to the cliff, and I'm pretty sure they reuse footage of Wendy Crewson just standing and staring out at the cliff. So, I don't know. And then we get our climax later, when she finally has had time to think about it, and she's like, you know, yeah, I came to this conclusion when I saw you snap like an insane person, but now that I've had time to go back out to the cliff with that reused footage and think again, got a question. Did you kill him by any chance? Did you kill the brother? Then that's when we get our climax, where, to the movie, I don't know if I can say to the movie's credit, it seems pretty reckless, but it's interesting that, how realistic this fight looks on the cliff. And that's because Macaulay Culkin and Elijah Wood were actually on the edge of a cliff that's like 180 feet as they were fighting, including when they're hanging off of it. So I do have to commend the realism of the climax, because that's kind of insane. And that's even, I think they said it was like a 30-foot drop or something, but that's actually Macaulay Culkin on wires taking the fall, too. Which, for how much he cost and his age at that time, doesn't it suck that the cost comes before the age and priorities, apparently? That they actually did that, and they killed Macaulay Culkin again merely 2 years after My Girl. Mind you, all, his death in My Girl is one of the saddest deaths in movie history. There's intended to be a satisfaction when Henry's mother drops him to his death, and we see his body on the rock before the waves carry him away. And then the movie just ends. It's that, I talked about this a while back, I think I was talking about Unlawful Entry or something, how, like, the ultimate, 90s thriller ending, Fear did this too. So many of these 90s thrillers did this. where once you kill the villain, the movie ends. No repercussions whatsoever. And this one goes the extra mile. There's narration from Elijah Wood where he actually says, all he does to sum it up is he says, Henry's gone and we're all safe now. Well, I have a few questions, and they're mostly about the mother. Because, I mean, I suppose it gives us the idea, like, you look at the title, and you might mostly take the title as the sort of ironic title talking about Henry, because it's like, the title refers to the way Henry's family sees him, despite the fact that we know what he's really like. But obviously it can also be an alternate title, because it's Mark by the end, because there's the whole thing of, Mark talking about her and saying, like, you know, she's my mother now, because he becomes absolutely convinced that she's, like, somehow the reincarnation of his own mother, despite the fact that she's always been around. It gets weird. I don't know. So, like, there are so many deep mental scars up to this point. Because we've got Mark's whole thing, where he is absolutely convinced that this woman is the reincarnation of his mother, who's already been in his life anyway. And basically, you know, fully accepts that this is his mother now. But the thing is that on her side also, she's obviously been grieving for the longest time about this baby that drowned in the bathtub that she blames herself for. But now, number one, she has to deal with the fact that her son was born evil. Her son was the one that killed the other baby, and in this particular scuffle, she had to make the decision to drop this kid to his death. So she's already fucked up beyond any comprehension because she lost a child. And now, after learning that one child killed the other child, she has to drop this child of her own off of a cliff and watch him die on the rocks below. It seems a little odd to me the movie would just let that go and say, oh, she's fine. It's like, well, the kid's dead. She's fine. She's got another kid in Mark now. There's so many open things here. Mark just coming on the narration and saying, Henry's gone, we're good. I do kind of wonder if she'd make the same decision or not, but I'm never going to ask her that. You know why you're never going to ask her that? Because she's probably in some fucking asylum somewhere dealing with this and is just in this total catatonic state forever now. But the movie will not address this at all. All that matters is that we drop Henry off a cliff and kill him so that he can't... The only actual people that he kills are Richard off screen, and he kills the dog. And that's... I think that's it. I mean, obviously he tries to kill his sister twice. But still, yeah, it's a weird-ass movie is what I'm trying to say. So... And I don't know why it is. Like I said, I do. I know exactly why I've seen it as many times as I have. And many of those times were as a kid. Was regardless of what you can say about it, I mean, it's a fascinating thing. Like, what, just everything about it. On top of all the stuff I talked about, and like I said, its existence itself, why his dad desperately wanted him in this, why Fox didn't fight more. Because I know, you know, hey, we'll pull him out of Home Alone 2 is a big deal, but I mean, like, still, looking from a marketing standpoint, it's like you have your audiences, your Home Alone audience. Does that not seem you're, like, risking your relationship with that audience that you got for Home Alone by putting this out? I don't know. It's such a weird thing, and I'm not sure of any other scenario I can compare it to from a where does this come from angle. So, yeah, there it is. So every now and then there are things about it that feel well made, and there's the Culkin performance and Elijah Wood's performance to that extent, but there's a lot of ways where it's not very well made also, and like I said, the tone is just so dreary and depressing. I don't know. I really don't know, but yeah. I'm sure I'll see it more times in the future, and my morbid curiosity will continue to just wonder all the endless possibilities of how the world somehow conjured this movie into existence, but there it is. So, real quickly, we'll just go into Mikey. I don't have a copy of Mikey. You can find it, at least as far as I know, you can find it just hanging around on YouTube. It's like, not any particular company seems to want it, so it's just hanging out there. And so, this time, we have Bryan Bonsall as the killer character, as I said. And this was, once again, kind of in between things here. Most people knew him from, like, those later years of Family Ties. I was one of those kids that grew up with Blank Check. And it was 3 years after Family Ties ended and 2 years before Blank Check that this movie appeared. And I don't know how many people know about it or know about its existence. It was one of those things where it was back in the early days of IMDb. I came across it at random, I think, and became really curious about it, and it sounded like kind of a freaky concept. And at some point, much later down the road, I was able to track it down. And it's, in many ways, it's underwhelming, and in many ways, it's kind of exactly what you want, depending on what you're seeking out. So, as I was saying before, no mystery whatsoever. The opening scene is Mikey killing people, and there's no build-up, there's no slow burn, there's no ambiguity. It's all right there on the table, clear as day. But the very opening scene is him just, starting a fire in the house. Just doing whatever the hell it is he does. And the mother walks in and says, like, Mikey, are you trying to kill us? And it's like, that's, as far as, like, subtlety and foreshadowing, that's as close as you're gonna get. So, the weird thing, though, about Mikey, like I was talking about the tone in The Good Son, the weird thing about Mikey is what I was talking about before, where I said Mikey has the feel of a slasher movie. That is including, he's got his, sister here, and he takes a doll from her, and he's being, evil before killing people. He's only like 30 seconds away from killing them, but we're gonna go ahead and do the thing of he's also a piece of shit kid. He takes the doll, and he's like, hey, I'm gonna throw it in the pool, fuck you. But this scene of two children fighting, where one has taken the doll, running around the house, and the sister's chasing after, going, give him my doll back, is intercut with a woman disrobing and sliding into a bath sensually. See what I mean? Where it's like, it is a slasher movie, just the weird part is that it's a kid that's the killer, and the intercutting of these two pieces of footage back and forth is weird. It's really fucking bizarre and off-putting and makes your skin crawl in all the wrong ways. The movie is trying to make your skin crawl. I don't know if that's what they had in mind, but there it is. And then sure enough, he has all these different methods of killing them, to his credit. He throws the doll into the pool, causing the sister to go in after it, and drowns. Then he electrocutes the mom, and then in this really bizarrely edited moment, has the father slip on marbles, fall through a glass door, which I'm pretty sure were much farther apart than this would happen, and then beats him to death with a baseball bat. By the way, all while recording this with a video camera that's off to the side. It's now Mikey, Portrait of a Serial Killer, apparently. And then sure enough, he'll go back and he'll watch the tapes later for fun. So, that's the setup. Now, I will say, I do commend them for not doing the mystery thing, because that would have been sort of the easy way to do it. And the way we've seen many times before, where it's like the, oh, is he or isn't he? It's like, he is. He straight up is. We see him, drop the hairdryer in the bathtub and kill the mother. We see him beat the dad to death with a baseball bat. Right in the opening scene. And then it's the whole thing of just shipping him off to another family, because it just looks like somebody broke into the house and did this. And as risky as it seems that he records himself doing this, that is never a factor in the movie. Ever. There's not even a suspenseful scene where somebody almost finds those tapes. The only reason they're there is because he watches them, and they don't do anything else with that. thinking that's, just doing the Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer thing will be enough to go, ooh, freaky, or whatever. But yeah, like I said, he even has his little quips, too, like, when, later on, after we see him bash the dad's head in with a baseball bat, when he goes to the second family, he's got his bat again, and the dad's like, oh, you play baseball, you a good pitcher? And he's like, says with that, knowing smile, I'm an even better hitter. And it's like, oh yeah, because you killed that guy. It's like, okay, so that's the kind of movie we're dealing with. But there are weird moments here that don't entirely add up. They seem like they were going to do one thing with the Mikey character, and then we're going to do a different thing with him. But two different takes of him acting two different ways ended up in the movie. It makes his character look a little inconsistent. Because, mainly in the way that he interacts with death. Because obviously we know he watches the tapes, and he, gets really brutal in the way he kills people. But the thing is like, there's also the thing where there ended up being a very similar scene in The Good Son. The scene in The Good Son when they're on the well, and he's, like, trying to get Mark to say, like, morbid things about his mom being dead, and it's like, what does she look like? What color was her skin and all that? And there's a similar scene like that with his friend here. His friend being the kid that was giving Sam Neill shit at the beginning of Jurassic Park. It's also in Nightmare on Elm Street 5. So there, he would have been probably better casting as Mikey, actually. But, yeah, the whole point is that Mikey is unassuming, of course. So he has these scenes where it's like, hey, when he was dead, like, did you touch him and stuff like that? Did you get to see what it felt like when he was dead? There's a scene where they're in the cemetery and Mikey wanders off and they find him. He's just laying on fresh dirt on top of a grave, just doing that. But then there's stuff like, and obviously he's going to kill an animal because they always kill a fucking animal. But then there's like the scene in the school when he's talking to Lyman Ward and the skeleton's there for the science class, but it's the real skeleton of a child. And when there's a scene that just lingers on Mikey looking at this skeleton in this way where it's like, I don't know if he's like scared of it, if he like sees himself, if he sees past victims. It never goes in. I mean, he uses that skeleton later, but the look on his face does not say a plan is forming that I'm going to use this. He looks like it's affecting him somehow. But it doesn't matter. We never really touch on that. And like I said, it almost feels like a scene that wasn't supposed to be... my character Mike was either going to be this character or the character he is for the rest of the movie. And this cut accidentally ended up in the movie. Where it's like he's a bit more like... He thinks more deeply about what exactly it is that he does. But we don't know, not really. Because then there's also the whole self-harm thing that doesn't really go anywhere. Where they catch him, like, he, like, pokes himself in the arms with thumbtacks. And it's like, oh, that's psychopathic behavior, that's why he does that. The end. It's like, oh yeah, he harms animals, and he does that psycho stuff. We read all the books. He does all that stuff. Nothing really adds up to... They don't really add together like some sort of math problem. It's just like, yeah, it's just all those things you see in psychopath books. He just does all that stuff. There's no... and then there's the whole thing with the fish, where he has, like, the connection there, where it's, like, the most human we see him is the way he interacts with these fish. It's, like, the only time we see him be genuinely childlike. I don't know if that's supposed to make him sympathetic, or at least a little more sympathetic, or give him, like, one human trait. But once again, it just doesn't... There's just nothing else this has to do with anything whatsoever. And it's like, even when they, like, get rid of the fish and he, like, freaks out about it, there's not, like, an instantaneous reaction to this. And he doesn't even say, like, when he kills them later, it's not like, hey, this is for the fish. Because, obviously, that would have been fucking dumb. But weirdly fit. It would have fit in this movie. With the stupidity of all this. Because when it gets to that last half hour is when he... Because, interestingly enough, this movie can be surprisingly boring. Like, I talk about it not necessarily being slow run because we see him kill people in the opening scene. But that's the thing, is he kills people in the very first scene of the movie, and we don't see him kill anybody else until the climax. Like, the last half hour is when he starts killing everybody again. And then the entire other hour here is just adults thinking he's weird. And us knowing his true nature, because there's no mystery after the first scene. We know he kills people. We're just waiting for him to do it again, but it takes him the whole movie to start doing it again. So it's like, I don't know if we're supposed to care about the other characters, even though we know they're just being served up as people for him to kill. I don't know. So then, there's a whole other creepy-ass storyline going on here. And that is him falling in love with his friend's sister. Falling in love. I don't know if Mikey's even old enough to grasp that concept, but here it is. And she's like an older teenage girl. She's got the douchey boyfriend and all that. And they do the prank where he's laying there and they think he's dead. And then when she goes to give him mouth-to-mouth, Bryan Bonsall really had it made as a kid. I mean, there was this scene. There's a scene where fucking Karen Duffy kisses him at the end of Blank Check. It's like, no wonder he got a little fucked up in adulthood. But yeah, this is like a whole storyline of him having like this almost adult-like fixation on her. And it's really fucking weird. And so after that kissing scene, she even says, like, you're a good kisser. It's like, okay, maybe she's just being friendly. But then it gets to the stuff where, like, after he has killed her boyfriend, doing the whole electrocuting in the jacuzzi thing, calling back what he did to the mom, which kind of comes back again later a little bit, but he really loves that method, apparently. But he says, after the boyfriend is dead, he hugs her and says, now you can love just me. And it's like, I mean, okay, in this particular case, it's like, they were trying to be super creepy. So it does work. It seems like a pretty easy way to accomplish that, but, I mean, at least they accomplished it. But even so, as I said, it does get very dumb. There's a lot of very senseless dialogue. It's senseless when it's not just being laughable. And sometimes in moments where it's like, it's just dialogue that doesn't add up. Like, when he's introducing him, the sister comes for the first time and sees Mikey there and meets him. She's like, hey, who are you? And he's like, I'm Mikey Trenton. And she's like, the Trentons don't have a kid. And it's like, okay, well, he's a new kid that's likely just come from somewhere. But yes, automatically assume he belongs to that particular family, even though he does. It's just a weird line of dialogue to just automatically say, there's only one family with that name and they don't have kids. Who the fuck are you? Okay. And then there's the weird moment, the other weird bathtub scene, where the new mother, we get another disrobing scene, a nice nude scene here, that Mikey is in the same shot of, which is a little weird. And he comes in, and he's able to walk in, and he is like, hey, and he says whatever he says, and she covers herself up, and she's like, Mikey, please learn to knock. The weird thing about this learn to knock line is this bathtub seems to be in some section that's like in the middle of the living room. Like, there's a doorway that Mikey comes through that you can see the living room in, like right here. And it's just like an opening. There doesn't seem to be a door there. It's like this is the weirdest set I've ever seen. But yes, Mikey, learn to knock on the door that's not there. By all means. Because when this mother takes baths, it's right out here in the open. Okay. So, it's that kind of movie, I guess. Like, you can just dismiss it as that, I guess. And then, yeah, as far as this dialogue goes, this is the kind of movie where once she pretty much learns that Mikey kills people, her response is, I think you need to go to your room. And it's like, that's not as silly as it sounds, because it's like, it sounds almost like parody, like she's saying, seriously, you need to go to your room because you kill people. But it's, I don't know, it's just all very, very senseless. But that's the thing, though, is it's like super, super campy, but it does seem to take itself seriously enough, especially with that entire hour portion that's just like the character studying him, that it still takes itself seriously enough that there's an uneven balance here in regards to what's camp and what isn't. But then obviously it does get super campy when he does start killing people, when he gets to start speaking as he does it. Because he didn't say a whole lot when he was killing the first family, but this time around he gets like, it's basically a variation of the same line. When he's standing on the edge of the jacuzzi and the boyfriend's in there and the boombox is there and it's plugged in. And he's like, hey, you shouldn't put that boombox there. And he's like, why? And then this exact delivery he says, 'cause you could die. And then that's when he kicks the boombox in. And then he does a similar line again. It was a long time. I only watched this again on YouTube to remember enough to be able to do this. Because before I watched it again, like, the only thing I remembered about this movie, apart from, like, the very last scene, was this scene with his teacher. When they have this whole thing with marbles. It's not important at the school, but the marble comes back because he's got a slingshot. And the teacher, he's confronting the teacher in the house. And he's saying, you know, you are the best teacher I ever had. But there's one thing that you didn't teach me, or one thing I wish you could have taught me. And she's like, what's that? And in that same fucking delivery, how to die. He uses the slingshot to shoot her in the eye with the marble, which does kill her. So, yeah. But, to the movie's credit, there is, like, one decent shot where I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. When there's, like, he's going after the sister after he's killed the teacher with the slingshot and the marble. And he's chasing her with a bow and arrow that he's already killed Lyman Ward with. And there's a picture of her and Mikey on the door that they took together when they were still friendly. And as he fires the arrow, she disappears through the door. She goes through the door and shuts it and hides. And as she shuts the door, the arrow goes through her in the picture when he was aiming at her in real life. I thought that was kind of... Given the movie that this is and the shit that's in it, that's what qualifies as that's kind of cool in this movie. But then there is actually... To the movie's credit, this is like the one other thing I took away from this movie the first time I saw it. There is one scene in this movie that is, like, genuinely creepy. Like, really, really fucking creepy. And it's, like, the very end. It's, like, one of the very last scenes. Because there's build-up to it. And the build-up comes from the fact that we know what has happened. And that's when John Deal, who's playing his new dad, comes home after everybody else in the house has been killed. And we know what's happened, and his dad's the only one that doesn't know. And Mikey greets him as if it's any other day. And it's like, hey, Dad, how was your day? This has been all awesome and all that. And as he comes into the house, we see the bloody fingerprints from where Mikey had made a call after he killed somebody, after he killed the mother, that are still on the phone right next to the dad's head. If he'll see if he just turns, and he doesn't, and it's just sitting there. And then behind him, we see that where he has killed Lyman Ward with a bow and arrow, he's got his dead body set up in the dining room, sitting up with the arrow still sticking out of him. And this is, like, right behind. Like, if the dad just looks through this doorway, he will see that. And it's like, if he's just barely not turning that way. And, like, all the evidence of all the death that's in the house, with this guy having no idea his family and all these people that worked at the school are dead in the house. And that's creepy in itself, but then they just kind of add the extra cherry on top when he goes into the room and sees his wife dead. There's the teacher that's dead. There's Lyman Ward, who was, like, the science teacher / gym teacher, also dead, and they're all sitting up at a fully made dinner table on the dining room with the kid skeleton from the science classroom in a seat as well, sitting up with them. And it's this really freaky ass image. Like, it still gets to me. It's like the one thing the movie really pulled off. But of course, we've got to end on our little haha got you cliffhanger where Mikey somehow blows the entire house up with a Molotov cocktail. Managing to escape, but of course, the child skeleton, they assume is Mikey's body. So Mikey's able to get away, and Funny games himself into another family. Roll credits. So this, obviously, like I said, it sounds like it's campy enough that you just go along with what it has. But like I said, there's a whole hour stretch where it's not really doing that, and it's like really, really inconsistent in how exactly it wants to do this whole material. And then it's just really got this frustrating climax. Like, it's campy enough, but it's still dumb to the point that you're watching the climax, and like, because Mikey's first weapon of choice during the climax is a hammer. And it's him and the mom. And it's like, he's got the hammer, and he's just walking up to her, and he's stalking up to her. And then glass breaks at some point, and he ditches the hammer for a piece of glass, and that's what he ends up killing her with. Because he, like, charges at her, and they, like, fall down the steps together, and he sticks her with the glass before running around and killing everybody else. And with the bow and arrow, I can maybe understand, but the hammer and the glass, this is one of those climaxes where a lot of the time, and the teacher too, like with the slingshot and all that, you're just watching the climax just saying, maybe punt his ass? Why are you not even trying to overpower him? He is this fucking tall, and he's a child. What is the threat of him charging at you with a hammer? It's not like he's throwing it. He has intent to, like, hit with it. But there are, like, so many things you can do before that hammer gets to you. Fucking kick him. Fucking kick him out the door, down the stairs, whatever the hell. Pick him up and throw him. He's fucking tiny. And that's the whole climax, is you're saying, like, this is not a threat to anybody. Like I said, maybe when he has the bow and arrow, but even then, I feel like it's escapable. There's a way Lyman Ward could have turned and gone the completely other direction. Mikey would have had to chase his ass and redo the whole thing. He did not have to die. And somehow, I don't know how the fuck Mikey got his bullets. I don't remember if they explained that or there was a scene showing that or not. But I don't know. It is frustratingly dumb, no matter how much you want to embrace it for the kind of thing it kind of seems like it's trying to be. But there's just too much inconsistency and too many, like, boring stretches where it's just, like, there's a reason I kind of forgot about it after I saw it, and that'll probably happen again after this, so... But, I mean, once again, if that makes you morbidly curious enough, as far as now, it's, like, hanging out on YouTube. It's just there. So, that's what these are. So, I obviously prefer The Good Son. I think The Good Son does a lot more, good things overall with what it's trying to accomplish or some effect it's trying to reach, but still, yeah, that's what all that is. So, this obviously is one in many of a long string of these, but we'll keep going. So, until all of whatever the hell is next, that's it.